fellow collectibles investors and comic book collectors and investors. Thanks very much for joining me here today. As you know, a lot of my videos revolve around sports card investing, but I also want to make sure that I'm covering comic books as well because it's something that I used to collect as a kid. I do invest in comic books myself here and there. I've got about probably 55 slabs. Nothing too crazy, not anything about what I'm covering today. But I love comic books, and I'm interested in kind of doing research on it and talking more along the lines of comic books as investments moving forward. So today I'm excited to talk about one of the all-time classic, iconic books. It's a Marvel book, Amazing Fantasy 15. Anybody that collects comic books, or even folks that don't, frankly, know about this book. This is the first appearance of Spider-Man. It was written by the legend Stan Lee, who unfortunately passed away here recently. And then the art was done by also legends Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. And this is a really kind of an amazing series. So it started with issue number 7, Amazing Fantasy number 7, and it actually ended with number 15. It ended with this issue that we're going to be talking about. And they ended up segueing into Amazing Spider-Man number 1 about 7 months later. This book came out in August 1962, and then in 1963, Amazing Spider-Man number 1 came out, and that is also another iconic book. I would love to have it. Today I'm going to be talking about whether or not this book should be considered an investment in your portfolio or in my portfolio in general. Is it investment grade? The answer to me for my own self is yes. Amazing Fantasy 15 is an iconic book. I think that it's one that will stand the test of time. If you ask yourself, which of these kind of comic book characters will be known 100 years from now, 50 years from now, I think Spider-Man is one of those. I can't say the same for all of these characters that are created, but Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, I mean, these are really kind of iconic characters that are never going to go away in my mind. I think they're going to be pop culture phenomenons. You've got all the movies, you've got all the action figures, you've got everything. It's similar to Star Wars. Star Wars is something that's just so entrenched in our daily life that it just doesn't feel like it's ever going to go away. So this book, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up kind of some screenshots of just recent sales on eBay just to show where some of the pricing has been for various grades. It's really kind of all over the place, but I have noticed, I remember looking back a couple of years ago, and I don't have data from a couple of years ago, unfortunately, but the prices were substantially lower a couple of years ago for some of the lower grades that I'm seeing. I mean, you're seeing CGC grades at 2.0, 2.5, 4.0 that are high. And not to say that they weren't inexpensive 2 years ago, but in the same way with sports cards, just making a supercharge and really action figures and video games that are rare and are graded, it just seems like the collectibles market in general has exploded over the last 2 years. It's not just cards, it's not just comic books, but comic books though recently have kind of, to me, and a lot of the vintage keys still hold up. I mean, a lot of them still carry value for sure, but just with the lack of movies and TV and everything with COVID going on, it seems to have sagged a little bit of the pricing from what I've seen. Now, I'm not saying that you can get everything, dirt cheap. That's certainly not the case. But this book in general has not missed a beat. Amazing Fantasy 15 is an expensive book. I found a cool story online. There was a sale in February of 2016 for a CGC 9.4 copy that sold for $454,100 in I believe it was a $5 million comic book lot. It was a collector, Walter Jakubowski, hopefully I'm not butchering his name too badly, that bought this copy in a handful of key Marvels. It was a lot, and he paid $10,000 in 1980 for this lot. And the way that it was explained is essentially, of course, this Amazing Fantasy number 15 is a very important part of that lot, but he was basically, what they're saying is that accounted for about $1,200 of the $10,000 he spent on the lot was for Amazing Fantasy number 15, if you can believe that. So now, granted, $10,000 in 1980 was a lot of money. If you're looking at just inflation and everything else, that certainly was a chunk of change back then, but it certainly paid off for him. He got that $454,000 for the Amazing Fantasy, and then of course those other keys that we don't know, obviously they've also appreciated, we would assume. So just a classic book that he kept in a safety deposit box for 35 years and then broke it open and sold it in 2016. I thought that was a really cool story. There's only 4 copies, so that was a 9.4 copy. There's only 4 copies on the CGC census in a 9.6, and there are no copies that I saw in a 9.8 or a 9.9 or a 10.0, which I wouldn't expect to find that anyway. But there are no 9.8 copies known in existence according to the census that have been graded anyway. There was a 9.6 copy that sold in 2011 for I believe it's a record. It was $1.1 million, one of only 3 books, comic books, that has broken that $1 million marker. And that book, my gosh, I mean, if it sold for $1.1 million in 2011, I'm sure if they wanted to sell now, it would be substantially more than that. Now, what was popular about this book, this Amazing Fantasy number 15, First Appearance of Spider-Man? The one thing that sticks out, Stan Lee wanted to make more relatable superhero characters, and you see this. This is the genius of Stan Lee. He, made these characters, whether we're talking about Spider-Man or X-Men or Black Panther, or there was a purpose for all of these different characters, but they had everyman problems, and they a lot of I believe the X-Men was created it was created during the Civil Rights Movement, and so a lot of these characters were kind of based on real life happenings that were going on during the 60s, and so Spider-Man was one of those characters that people could finally relate to. Before this, it was every superhero is just unstoppable and is, godlike, and that was it. This was the first vulnerability that was added into these characters, and it made them very relatable, and it made this sell. Amazing Fantasy number 15 was one of the highest selling comic books that Marvel had at that time, and then of course decided that was their last issue of Amazing Fantasy, and then they moved it into its own solo book, and of course it worked out great. So just really interesting how they did this, and it's incredible how it spawned into all of these other characters and all these other books and all these different publishers and different things, and they really kind of a lot of what they did was copied by other publishers, and they just kind of it was the foundation that was set. And Stan Lee was doing this. He was doing this for 15, 20 years before these ever became huge successes. This guy was he was a long time writer, and hit it big when he got to Marvel. But just an incredible story. There's some great documentaries on Stan Lee if you haven't seen them. A lot of the people that are watching this probably already know a lot of these stories, but anyone that's getting into this, looking at these kind of alternative investments as options, Amazing Fantasy number 15 really in any grade is going to be expensive, and it's going to be, it's just one of those iconic books. But when I look at these compared to sports cards or rare coins, they certainly have their place. And this is one of probably a handful, maybe 10 comic books that I would say are just, I don't want to say can't miss, but these are just the ones that are, it's like the Michael Jordan rookie cards or the Mickey Mantle rookie cards. They've stood the test of time, and they're just incredible. So in my opinion, do I think that these are great investments? I do. Of course, the price matters. You've got to price compare, and you have to find a price that suits your budget, and it's got to make sense as part of a larger financial plan. But what an amazing book to have. It's almost like people that collect fine art, and they just love it. This book is a piece of history in your hand. I one day it's a goal of mine to have a copy of this book, and so we'll see how it goes. I'm going to have to work up to it, but guys, thank you very much for joining me for this video. If you have any comments or any stories about this book in particular, please put them in the comment section below. I want to learn more about this book, as well as some of those early Silver Age keys. And as you move kind of into the Golden Age, I would really kind of like to learn more about those older books. So any sort of feedback you have, I would love to hear it. Again, thank you guys for tuning in, and we will talk to you again next time.